Hi there, what's up? Hope you're all safe. Today, once again, we're going to revisit Z6 and Z6II, especially after a few firmware updates that's done to the second generation of cameras in the Z series. I think it is important to just have a look at the cameras and see whether the Z6 and the Z6II, whether these cameras are significantly different today than they were at the time of the launch of the Z6II or not. So both these cameras are in the market right now, and that causes quite a bit of confusion in people. Which one to get? Is there really any difference between the two in terms of performance? How do they autofocus? How are they in low light? How is the eye autofocus? Is the Z6II any better? Will the Z6 work for most of us? These are the questions. So I thought I'll test out both the Z6 and the Z6II with the latest firmwares and actually show you how the different performance. I chose a difficult low light situation so that the differences are all the more visible. So yes, spoiler alert, there are differences, obviously, and I have been saying that for a long time now. This low light test will allow me to pull apart the differences and show you how much you can push your Z6 and at what level you might want to move to the second generation body. But before we get into the details, let me clarify one thing to you. The Z6 is a very reliable camera. The autofocus needs to be set up right, and once that is done, it's a very reliable camera with outstanding image quality and raw output. The video features are excellent for a camera that is priced just at $1,400 US. With additional $200, you can unlock ProRes RAW, Blackmagic RAW with an external recorder like the Atomos Ninja 5. Therefore, the Z6 is not only a great photo camera, but for the price, it is an amazing deal to build a fully rigged video camera. Now let us see how they perform, and we will begin with the Z6II. Look, this is recorded or shot well after sunset and on the balcony. There is some faint ambient light coming from the street lights outside and the lights from those apartments that you see there. On the camera, it looked completely dark, so I had to raise the shadows in the video editing software in order for you to uh, actually see what's going on here in this video. To repeat, this scene has gone through significant shadow lifting, and that's how dark it was. Please notice the exposure meter here. It's at minus 2.5 to minus 3 exposure value. Mostly the ISO was quite high with a very low shutter speed. It's being shot with a 50mm 1.8 s lens wide open. See how it can detect the face and the eye. That's excellent, but it can't quite hold onto the eye. It can't stick to it. By the way, do you know that almost 87% of you do not subscribe after you've watched a video? However, it doesn't cost you anything at all. So if you like this video so far, please press the subscribe button and also press the bell icon so that you get regular notifications when I upload a new video. So the Z6II isn't that great at minus 2.5 EV with AFC and with IAF, right? Look, this video is for those who want to learn how to use the camera, not for those who are measuring themselves and buy the camera brands or the make of the model. So let's keep it curious and healthy. I was able to snap one picture with autofocus continuous and with IAF it was sharp. Here you go. Now I'll drop the ISO to 3200 to make it more challenging, and I shift to AFS. Just wanted to see if AFS is doing better. I selected single point. The low light assist was on. The camera looked on. The camera locked on and focused on her. Suddenly, I had no problem focusing at all. But frankly, AFS is not my preferred way of shooting, especially when there are micro movement with the model. So this is like the last option for me. Let's move on. We now have a continuous light on inside the studio. The light is a Godox SL60 at 10% power right now, just at 10% at its lowest power setting. The aperture meter is still at minus 2.5 EV or less in this setting. The shutter speed is higher, however, at 1 to 100, blocking about 2 stops more light than 1/50th, which was what it was on the balcony, a while back. The ISO is now lowered at a nice 1000, not 3200 or 8000 anymore. And suddenly the camera can not only see the eye at such low light, it can focus perfectly well. I bring the ISO down to 250, it's minus 4 EV now, minus 4 exposure value, and the Z6 II can find the eye and focus on it beautifully, just beautifully, at ISO 640, and at minus 3 EV it has no problem at all. So here's my observation for this section of the video. The performance changes with ISO. Although one might increase the ISO and manage the exposure at a mathematical level, at the same mathematical level there is more noise than signal, and the Z6II requires a bit more real light, a bit more signal, like that coming from the Godox light, right? Even at 10%. And mind you, it's pretty dim. This light is pretty dim at 10%, especially after passing through 2 layers of diffusion. Now, even with that kind of light at ISO 1000, the camera moves confidently till about 1600 ISO. The camera can manage really well with AFC and with minus 3 EV. But once we reach 3200 or cross 2500 ISO to maintain exposure, it starts to struggle. Now, when we repeat the same test with the Z6, we immediately see the difference. The Z6 is moving in and out of focus frequently. It can't settle on the eye, and therefore shifting between the face detect and the eye detect, right? And the Z6 works flawlessly and, more importantly, quite confidently at minus 1 EV with decent light and low ISO. One can push it to minus 2 EV, but that's about it. It can become a bit frustrating at that point at minus 1.5 to 2 EV, or even or at a lower exposure than that. Now back to the Z6II. Here I test the stickiness of the focus box on the eye, which was one of the updates done in the latest firmware, the 1.2 firmware, and it looks flawless to me. It did not trail behind the eye or the face at all, and that's a really nice improvement, because it'll inspire a lot of confidence in photographers while on the job, because we need that visual confirmation when we are at it, right? And trailing focus at times can confuse the photographer, so a great job done by Nikon here. Now back to Z6 again. We test the Z6 with the same light and exposure levels, and you see the difference in focus performance immediately. Remember, the Z6II can now detect the face and the eye from a much farther distance. With the previous firmware update that happened, that came out in January, we feel that the absence of that ability here in the Z6 body a little bit. Plus, clearly the low light performance is not that good. Now, I must mention here that that low light AF autofocus was turned on for the Z6, but not for the Z6II. So all that performance on the Z6II was without that extra dedicated processing for low light situations, and that's great news for Z6II owners, because Nikon has said that switching on the low light autofocus function will improve accuracy in low light, but it will slow down the speed of focus, or the overall speed of the camera's operation. If you made it this far, maybe you are learning something from the video, or at least enjoying it. And since it's free, please press the subscribe button, and so that this channel can grow faster and we can bring you more interesting content in the future. Anyway, as I push the ISO up and slow down the shutter and come closer to her, the Z6 starts picking her up, picking her face and eye, and it's back, and now it's doing a good job. It's fairly accurate, but every now and then we realize that the pattern detection ability is just less in the Z6. You feel that it's running an older version of the software. Will Nikon push a new software to the Z6 in future? No one knows. Can the camera process that with one processor? We don't know. Perhaps that's what the bottleneck is. And off topic here for a bit, perhaps that is Nikon's biggest job right now, to make a processor so powerful that it can overpower the competition for the next few years. And the Z9 is supposed to come with XP 7. So that's great news, and we're looking forward to what that new processor can do. But not only that, we are also looking forward to how quickly the processor migrates into a high resolution Z6 III or an updated Z6 Z7 III or even a Z8. Also, will we see a pro crop sensor body like a Z70 anytime soon? Okay, coming back again. I asked her to confuse the camera by turning away and quickly coming back to face the camera again, and she did a great job, really. In this test, she turns her head away and her hair is all over the place. At times, her hands are blocking her face and eye. Can the Z6 II recognize, focus, keep track on her eye and her face and take sharp pictures? The first observation is that the focus box is really much stickier now. The second observation is that all my photos are in focus. The camera did a great job of not getting confused at all. What's surprising is how quickly it comes back to the eye. It's really, really snappy. Now, then I use the wide L box, which works excellent. The photos are in focus. The performance is even more confidence inspiring. The one thing that I was able to do, however, was to throw the face detection box, that yellow box, out of the red boundary within which it's supposed to stay. But I'm quite happy with this minor 1.2 update on the Z6 II. Now let's move on to the Z6 again. Clearly, the detection performance is not as good, especially when there is so much confusing movement. It's frequently detecting what's not face as face, losing track of the eye much more often and going back to the face detect. However, having said that, the Z6 took many shots in focus in this test. About 70% of them were in focus in this difficult test, which is honestly quite good in a controlled environment where you can have your retakes. In conclusion, the Z6 II performs at least two stops better in terms of low light. It can detect face and eye from a much further distance than the Z6, and the focus box is much stickier and therefore inspires a lot more confidence while shooting because there is a visual confirmation. And you know that your camera is in focus. The Z6 II hardly gets confused with rapid movements or obstructions in front of the face, in front of the model. Both cameras are better with decent light and low ISO than very bad light and high ISO when it comes to focusing, meaning it needs a bit more signal than noise. In short, the gap in performance between the two cameras has widened so much that there can be no mixing of the two in terms of reliability of focus and just overall speed of operation from starting up to taking pictures. But remember, there are more firmware updates to come to the Z6 II. We have only seen 1.2. The Z6 is now working with firmware version 3.3. Going by that, we're yet to see two massive updates, firmware 2 and firmware 3 for the Z7 II and the Z6 II. And those are likely to unlock a whole lot more performance in the version 2 Z bodies. I personally believe that the advancements made with the upcoming flagship will be repackaged as updates for these new bodies. Now, coming back, the road ahead for the Z6 II is really promising. But we had asked a question at the start of the video. Will the Z6 work for most of us? Absolutely yes. People do not usually take pictures in -4 exposure value. The AF on the Z6 is quite decent, excellent colors, brilliant files, extremely well built and weather sealed, very well weather sealed in fact. The amazing Nikon ergonomics, the powerful video features. If you are or desire to be in the Nikon ecosystem, you just can't go wrong with the Z6. With its new pricing, the Z6 is just irresistible. The money you save can be used to buy a lens. I recommend the magical Nikon 50mm 1.8 S lens for the Z mount. And this is where I leave you in this episode, and I'll see you soon. Please stay safe.